Is this footage from the ER? Judge Malone asked as he leaned forward, hand hovering above the paused screen. Nancy Feldman stood frozen, lips slightly parted. For once, the clipboard wasn't in her hands. I didn't answer. I just stared at the screen, at the pale blue curtain, the trembling hand gripping the hospital bed rail, and the moment Nancy Feldman pulled it back like she owned the place. She didn't even knock. The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear someone in the second row exhale sharply, probably another Willow Heights homeowner, finally seeing her for what she was. That was the moment everything shifted, because Nancy didn't know that camera was running, and she definitely didn't know I had a copy. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. She thought I was just another rule follower, another homeowner who would quietly repaint a fence or remove a flagpole because someone on the board felt it disrupted harmony. She saw the blueprints on my wall and assumed I was a hobbyist. But I'm not just an engineer. I'm a structural compliance consultant. I help municipalities assess disaster shelters and emergency zones. FEMA certified, county licensed, fully qualified. And I built that storm shelter myself, because last fire season, my wife collapsed from smoke inhalation while 6 months pregnant. That shelter wasn't a luxury. It was the only place I could guarantee she'd be safe. So when I opened the HOA's letter that morning, the first violation notice, it felt personal. They called it a non-compliant architectural obstruction. Said the shelter entrance disrupted the visual unity of the property line. Said it posed a non-approved protrusion risk per community guidelines. It was nonsense. I'd filed all plans with the county, registered the build as an emergency structure, cross-referenced California residential code and FEMA shelter integration protocols. It passed every inspection, every code line, every load-bearing threshold. But Nancy didn't care about compliance. She cared about power. She wanted to show the board that she could make even me fold. That's how it started. Harmless fines, vague warnings, empty threats. Until it escalated. Until she crossed into something irreversible. That's when the footage changed everything. I wasn't planning to take her to court. I just wanted her to back off. Let my wife rest. Let my house stand. But she made it war. She called in an anonymous complaint to the insurance board, claiming the shelter was psychologically manipulative. And then she followed Emma. My wife had another scare. Blood pressure spike. I rushed her to the ER. I thought that was the end of it. I didn't even know Nancy had been there until Jared called me 2 days later. Jared Olson, HOA night supervisor, friend of nobody, but not cruel. That night, his voice shook. Dan, something happened. She went to the hospital. I didn't understand at first. Emma? Yeah, but she's okay. No, Nancy. She went there, said she was doing a welfare inspection. That was the moment I felt it, that slow, hollow drop in my stomach, like missing a stair step in the dark. It wasn't just about rules anymore. She invaded the most sacred space we had left. Privacy. I called the hospital, asked to speak to security, asked if they had camera footage from that night. The nurse paused. We already sent a copy to your HOA. We thought it was part of an insurance audit. That's when I knew Nancy had already used it, had already framed it her way. But the hospital, they kept their own backup. One not edited, one with timestamps, one with sound. And now that footage was in my hand, playing in a courtroom, while Nancy Feldman finally stood in the very spotlight she used to destroy people. She looked smaller now, like someone trying to calculate an exit, but there was no exit left. Where are you watching from? This isn't just a story about property rights. It's about dignity, and what happens when one person pushes too far. Stick with me, because by the end of this, Nancy Feldman won't just be out of power. She'll wish she'd never touched that curtain. The envelope was thick, thicker than usual, and tucked under my welcome mat like it was hiding. No stamp, no signature on the outside. Just Willow Heights Compliance Division, typed dead center in 14-point Arial. I didn't open it right away. Emma was sleeping upstairs, finally calm after another rough night. Her blood pressure had dropped, and for once, the house felt still. But when I opened it, I knew it was the beginning. Notice of violation, item, unauthorized structural feature, status, non-compliant, corrective deadline, 10 days from date of notice. I read it twice, 3 times. Then flipped to the second page, where a grainy photo of the shelter entrance sat beneath a bold heading. Violation detail. The photo was taken from the sidewalk. A red arrow had been drawn over the hatch with the words, "Obstructs community harmony." Obstructs community harmony? It wasn't even visible from the street unless you stood at a very specific angle, or zoomed in with a camera, like this one. She'd already started. I stepped outside, scanning the curb. Empty street, quiet hedges. But I could feel it, her gaze lingering somewhere nearby. I knew Nancy Feldman didn't send letters like this without personal involvement. The violation wasn't random. Willow Heights was known for its clean sightline policies, one of those rules buried in vague aesthetic language, often used as a weapon. Nancy had applied it before. A neighbor with a disabled son had built a ramp. Nancy flagged it as non-conforming slope presentation. Took 3 months and a threat from a local disability rights group to get it overturned. I walked back into the kitchen and pulled out the blueprints. I kept every design sheet in a fire-safe box, including the stamped approval letter from the County Housing Board. The shelter had been reviewed under California's Residential Resilience Initiative. I had the permits, the maps, the soil analysis. It didn't matter. Not to her. This wasn't about law. It was about submission. The next day I passed 3 neighbors walking their dogs. Each of them glanced at me, then quickly looked away. No one waved. Later that evening I saw a fresh post in the Willow Heights online forum. Some of us follow the rules. Some don't. Makes you wonder who our HOA is protecting. No name attached, but the timing was too perfect. The image underneath? A cropped shot of my shelter. Emma was on the couch when I came in, reading through the hospital's birth prep guide. She looked up. "What's wrong?" I sat next to her and handed her the violation notice. She read silently, fingers curling slightly around the paper. "I thought we were done with this," she whispered. "I thought this was safe." "It is," I said, "legally, structurally. It's not about the rules." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a personal attack. It was a pattern. I started making a list. The ramp incident. A neighbor fined for a wind chime. A woman asked to remove a childhood treehouse because it distracted from uniform tree coverage. And now, us. Nancy had been doing this for years. I printed the county's shelter compliance ordinance and circled the sections we followed. I compared our entrance layout to the diagrams in the FEMA residential shelter guide. Then I checked the HOA charter and found something important. There was no amendment on file that explicitly banned emergency shelters, just vague language about external deviations requiring board review. The board hadn't reviewed ours. They never asked, because Nancy never brought it up for a vote, which meant she was acting unilaterally. That's when the idea first sparked, not just to fight back, but to expose her. At 2 a.m., I opened my professional account and pulled up the compliance logs I kept for municipalities. I checked cross-reference structures under recent California code changes and found 3 precedents where HOA violations had been overturned due to state-level emergency mandates. I wasn't just a homeowner. I was a recognized authority in the very system she was trying to manipulate. Outside, the security light clicked on. A figure walked past, tall with a reflective vest. Jared. Quiet as always, not stopping, not waving, not yet. I turned back to the notice. 10 days. That was her window, but it would be mine too. He stood at the edge of my driveway like he didn't want to be seen there, hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched like a teenager caught sneaking a beer. The reflective vest he always wore was zipped up tight, even though it was warm, for fall. His name tag tilted sideways. J. Olson, barely clinging to the edge. I opened the door but didn't step out. "You patrolling or visiting?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, just nodded slightly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I'm off duty," he finally muttered. "I shouldn't be here." I leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "Yet here you are." His eyes darted toward the HOA cameras on the corner lamppost, then to the bushes, then to the sidewalk, anywhere but my face. "I didn't know she was gonna file that violation," he said. "She doesn't tell me anything. But I saw her taking pictures 2 nights ago. Around midnight, she was crouched behind the landscaping truck." He paused, looked down at his boots. "She shouldn't have been doing that alone. Not with the coyotes lately. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because that's how Jared worked. He wasn't confrontational. He was a shadow, a background process in a place full of noisy people with fake smiles. And now, here he was, outside my house, twitchy and exposed. "She tell you what she was planning?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, just said the storm guy needed to learn the rules." The words hung between us like smoke. I didn't correct him. I wasn't the storm guy. I was the guy who tried to protect his wife from the next evacuation, from the next oxygen shortage, from the next blackout. But that's not how Nancy saw it. "She ever mention Emma?" I said. His hands clenched slightly. That was the first tell. Then his shoulders pulled back like someone bracing against wind. "Yeah," he said. "After the ambulance came last time, she told the board you were playing victim to justify unauthorized construction. Said she'd seen it before. People who use emergencies as shields." I took a breath through my nose. The cold sat heavy in my chest. Jared kept shifting. His heel scraped the concrete, then his toe. His posture kept resetting, like he couldn't find a way to stand that didn't make him complicit. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. He finally looked up. "I've worked here 7 years, never had a complaint, never took a side, but this..." He gestured vaguely toward my house. "This isn't right. She's doing stuff she's not logging, and now she's asking weird questions about hospital visitor access." My stomach tightened. "She say why?" "No, just that she might verify a claim in person. Whatever that means." He looked down again. "You need to be careful." I stepped out onto the porch now, not to intimidate him, but to see him clearly. The lines on his face weren't guilt, they were fear. Fear of losing his job, fear of retaliation, fear of being caught in between. "You said she wasn't logging everything?" "You mean surveillance records?" Jared hesitated. "I mean, there's stuff missing. Stuff that should have been in. The archive last week isn't there, and I'm not the one who pulled it." That was enough. I didn't push further. He wasn't ready, but he came here for a reason, to ease a pressure valve, to warn me without becoming a target himself. He turned to leave, but paused at the sidewalk. "She's got another notice drafted. Bigger fines, says you're unresponsive to corrective direction. She's bringing it to the board Tuesday, but she won't show them everything he walked off without waiting for a response." Inside, Emma was still asleep. I closed the door slowly, letting the click echo through the foyer. Nancy was escalating. Jared knew it. I knew it. She was building a case, but hiding the process, redacting facts, skipping votes, quietly tearing through the rules she claimed to protect. And now I had a witness, one who wasn't ready to stand beside me, but wasn't standing beside her either. That's where revolutions always start, right in the middle. The new letter didn't come folded. It arrived in a manila envelope hand-delivered by a courier wearing a Navy HOA windbreaker. He didn't make eye contact, just dropped it in my mailbox and walked off like he couldn't get off my property fast enough. I stood at the kitchen counter, envelope in hand, before I even took off my jacket. The air smelled like leftover coffee and lemon cleaner. Emma had just left for her follow-up appointment, and for a moment, the house was quiet again. But I knew it wouldn't last. I slid the document out and unfolded it slowly. Not a violation this time. This was worse. Final compliance demand. Immediate structural correction required. Penalties effective in 72 hours. $500 per day until remedied. 3 pages of legalese, bullet points. Citations to clauses that didn't exist in the HOA's original charter. A second letter was clipped to the back, this one from the HOA's Architectural Integrity Subcommittee, which, to my knowledge, hadn't met in over 2 years. I called it what it was, a paper weapon. Nancy had gone nuclear. The kitchen window gave me a clear view of the shelter hatch, the same curved steel plate I'd designed with seismic flexibility and fireproof coating. I remembered measuring every inch of that opening by hand, making sure it could seal shut in under 5 seconds in case of smoke or embers. She wanted it gone, not modified, not hidden. Gone. I sat down at the kitchen table and reread the section outlining penalties. $500 a day, compounded weekly, threats of liens, vague language about further legal action. It wasn't just aggressive, it was meant to break me. She wanted me to choose my home or my wife's safety. I turned the page and found a grainy black and white photo of the shelter entrance again. Only this time, the image had been digitally enhanced, zoomed, and distorted to emphasize the hatch's contrast with the surrounding landscape. The caption, "Visual disruption confirmed. Psychological impact. Pending further review." That last line hit harder than I expected. Psychological impact? Was she actually trying to argue that a safety structure traumatized the neighborhood? I pulled out the codebook again. California Residential Construction Code, Emergency Shelter Standards, Section 18.9A. I'd memorized it by now. There it was in plain text. No, HOA shall enforce aesthetic conformity rules in a manner that compromises state-registered emergency resilience structures. I wasn't just protected, I was protected by name. I grabbed my work laptop and logged into the compliance database. I entered my state contractor ID and opened the digital cert logs. There, time-stamped and signed, were the FEMA compliance specs for the hatch. Weight load tests, fireproof certifications. I had more than permission. I had proof. But that's not what worried me most. What worried me was how fast she was moving. This wasn't bureaucracy. This was coordinated, strategic. Like she knew which gaps to push through before I could close them. I scanned the rest of the packet and saw something new, something deeply wrong. At the bottom of the second page, it said, "Preliminary witness testimony available upon board request. HOA reserves right to verify relevant medical or emotional claims." That's when my hands went cold. She wasn't just going after me. She was going after Emma. I grabbed my phone and dialed the hospital, asked to speak to administration. When the operator transferred me, I gave them my name, my wife's, and asked a simple question. "Has anyone requested access to my wife's medical visit logs in the last 10 days? There was a long pause, then the admin returned. "There was an inquiry, yes, from a representative of the Willow Heights Homeowners Association. We didn't release anything, but it raised some flags." I thanked her and hung up slowly. Nancy was trying to build a case, an emotional manipulation angle, a mental health justification for tearing down the shelter. But I had something she didn't: credentials. She couldn't see the layers of certification wrapped around every inch of that hatch. But I could, and I was done waiting. I pulled out the folder with my FEMA engineering license and made a copy. Then I printed the compliance page from the State Housing Department. Nancy Feldman had just made her biggest mistake yet. She made me prove her wrong. I shut the door to my home office and locked it behind me. Emma was asleep upstairs, the white noise machine humming softly through the ceiling. She didn't know about the second letter yet. I hadn't told her about the threat to access her hospital records. I couldn't. Not until I had something concrete in hand. I needed to be sure. My office wasn't large, just a converted guest room with 2 monitors, stacks of engineering models, and a whiteboard that hadn't been wiped in 6 months. But it was mine. It was where I tracked resilience metrics, ran code compliance checks, logged structural evaluations for disaster zones. And now it was where I'd dismantle Nancy Feldman's entire case. I pulled up the FEMA Resilience Shelter Integration Portal. My certification credentials gave me access to the internal compliance tool used by municipalities and state housing officials to check structure legality in shared jurisdictions, like HOAS. I entered my parcel number, state ID, and permit registration. 3 records came back instantly. Structure type, residential reinforced shelter. Compliance status, FEMA code 12, a verified, legal obstruction. Protection, active under State Bill 2449C. There it was. That last line wasn't just bureaucratic jargon, it was the shield I needed. I clicked into the link. Bill 2449C had been passed 2 years ago, after wildfires in the Central Valley revealed how many HOAS were pressuring homeowners to remove or hide storm shelters that didn't match their community aesthetic. The bill explicitly prohibited HOAS from citing visual disruption as grounds for enforcement if the structure had verified emergency status filed with the county registrar. I opened a second tab and pulled up the registrar's digital map, parcel 37-118-C, Daniel Reeve, shelter. ID approved, status active, fire/seismic rated, no aesthetic disputes permitted. I sat back in my chair. The air conditioner clicked on, soft and cold. The room felt still. Nancy didn't just push a rule, she violated state housing law. I double-checked the HOA charter and found the section she cited in her letter. No homeowner shall install external structures visible from adjacent properties without board review and written approval. But there were two problems. One, I had submitted my plans. I'd emailed them directly to the HOA general inbox with the subject line, "Shelter Permits, registered with county." I even had a red receipt from the system. 2. Her letter referenced a subsection, 12.4b, that didn't exist in the original charter. I pulled up the HOA's digital archive. The charter hadn't been amended in 5 years. There were only 11 sections. She made it up. She fabricated a subsection to make her threat sound official. And worse, she was using that false authority to intimidate me into tearing down a legal structure. I started screen capturing everything: the bill, my registration, the parcel listing, her letter, the read receipt, the absence of 12.4b in the HOA charter. If I was going to fight back, it had to be clean, documented, verified, not emotion, not opinion, proof. Then I thought of something else. What if Nancy had done this before? I opened the compliance portal again and entered a search term, Willow Heights HOA. 32 results came up. I narrowed it to the last 18 months. 3 homeowners had filed grievances against the board, citing illegal enforcement tactics. One of them had installed a water cistern on the side of their home, approved by the county, flagged by Nancy. Another had a solar panel array, legal, permitted, but fined $200 a week for reflective nuisance. I clicked into each case. In all 3, the homeowners had no professional background. They hired lawyers or dropped the fight entirely, and that's when I realized something chilling. Nancy was targeting people who didn't know the code, but I did. I printed the FEMA bill, stapled it to the shelter specs, and placed it in a new folder. I titled it Exemption Packet Reeve. This wasn't just a violation anymore. This was a pattern. A coordinated abuse of power hiding behind fake clauses and aesthetic language. And I was about to be the first person in Willow Heights who could expose it from the inside out. The hospital smelled like plastic gloves and lemon disinfectant. Everything was too bright, too white. Even the elevator music felt like it was trying too hard to be calm. Emma was still upstairs when I arrived, room 421B. A nurse was just walking out with a blood pressure cuff in one hand and a clipboard in the other. She gave me a tight smile and nodded toward the door. "She's stable. Try to keep her stress low." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Inside, the lights were dimmed. Emma was half asleep, one hand resting on her belly, the other clutching her phone like it might vanish if she let go. Monitors beeped softly in rhythm. Her breathing matched their pace. She opened her eyes slowly when I sat beside her. "Did you get it?" I knew what she meant. The letter, the fines, the threats. "Yeah," I said. She escalated it. $500 a day, starting in 2 days. Emma swallowed hard. "Is it even legal?" "No," I said, "and I can prove it." I told her about the bill, 2449C, the FEMA certification, the fake clause she cited, the homeowners she'd targeted before. She didn't say anything for a long time, just stared at the ceiling like it might crack and cave in. "I keep thinking," she whispered, "about the shelter. What if there's a fire this year? What if she makes us take it out and we need it?" I reached over and took her hand. She's not going to win. But the truth was, I hadn't fully believed that until right now. Seeing Emma here, hooked to machines, looking smaller than she ever had, that shifted something in me. This wasn't about legal precedent anymore. It wasn't about precedent or power plays. It was about my wife, my family, the future we were barely hanging on to. Nancy was threatening the one piece of ground I had fortified against the chaos of the world, and I wasn't going to let her take it. I stepped into the hallway to call Jared. He didn't answer at first, but a minute later, I got a text. "Meet me at the gatehouse after shift." 2 a.m. No cameras there. I pocketed my phone and turned back toward Emma's room, but paused when I saw 2 figures at the nurse's station, whispering. One of them wore the navy blue of Willow Heights security. I recognized the side profile, Nancy. She was holding something, maybe a file or a notepad. and gesturing with 2 fingers like she always did when she thought she was being subtle. The nurse was shaking her head. Her posture was stiff, spine straight like a ruler. I stepped behind a column and watched. After a minute, Nancy turned and left. No file in hand. I waited until the nurse was alone, then walked up. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "Was that woman just asking about a patient in 421B? She hesitated. "I can't disclose that." I leaned in. "I'm her husband. I'm also the one dealing with a legal situation involving that woman's HO. The nurse glanced both ways, then lowered her voice. She asked if your wife had been admitted for psychological observation. Said it was for an insurance review. I closed my eyes, just for a second. "And you didn't give her anything, right?" "Of course not," she snapped. "She didn't have any authority." But she tried. Nancy tried to label my wife unstable, to justify removing a legal shelter built for her safety. That was it. That was the line. I didn't care what it cost. I didn't care what smear tactics she used or what false documents she drafted. This wasn't just a zoning dispute. This was targeted, personal, and dangerously close to criminal. And now I had motive, legal standing, proof of pattern. I walked back into Emma's room and kissed her forehead. "Rest," I said. "I'm going to fix this." Then I left the hospital with one thought echoing in my head. I built that shelter to protect us from fire. Now I was going to use it to burn her case down. The gatehouse always looked like a toy fort. Vinyl siding, tiny windows, floodlights too bright for the space they covered. It was built to feel secure, but I'd never felt less safe there. Until tonight. Jared let me in through the side door just after 2 a.m. He didn't say a word, just locked it behind us and pulled the shades down tight. Inside, the only light came from a desk lamp with a yellow hue that made everything look older than it was. His desk was cluttered with shift logs, a cracked walkie-talkie, and a half-eaten protein bar. But the monitor was what caught my eye. He had security feeds running, live, and more importantly, archived. "You said no cameras here?" I asked. "Only external," Jared replied. "Nancy's orders. She doesn't like the idea of being watched from inside." The irony was thick. He pulled out a small flash drive and set it on the desk between us. His hand lingered on it for a second, then slid it toward me. "That's from 4 nights ago," he said. "Footage of her at the hospital entrance. I don't know what she was doing inside, but I do know this. She used the HOA's contractor pass to bypass visitor protocols. That's impersonation." I stared at the drive for a second, then picked it up carefully, like it might detonate. "What else is on here?" He swallowed. "A few internal memos she sent to the board. Well, technically, to herself. She never CC'd anyone, but they were stored on the shared network. I shouldn't have access, but the firewall's weak." He pulled up one of the files on the screen. Subject: Re-violation strategy. Must confirm mental health incident to justify permit override. Will initiate welfare angle. Shelter entrance already framed in violation terms. Use non-conforming obstruction and potential emotional stressor language for leverage. My chest went cold. "She wrote this?" Jared nodded. "There's more. She drafted a second violation letter before the board even reviewed the first. She was always going to escalate." I sat down slowly. The chair creaked under me. "She planned the whole thing like a PR rollout." He looked at me, finally meeting my eyes. "She doesn't care about rules, Dan. She cares about how things look. The neighborhood, her image, this shelter. It makes her feel powerless, like she doesn't control everything." I stared at the monitor. A pause frame showed Nancy walking into the hospital lobby, her handbag clutched tight, eyes darting like a thief who thinks she's invisible. "You know what this is, right?" I said. Jared nodded. "Abuse of authority. Fabrication of enforcement strategy. Unauthorized access to private property and medical spaces." His voice was flat, but his hands were trembling. "You sure you want to be part of this?" I asked. He took a long breath. "She's been doing this for years." I've let it slide. I told myself it wasn't my job, that I was just here to monitor traffic and write up noise complaints. He looked away toward the row of monitors showing empty sidewalks. "But this? Going after your wife like that? In a hospital?" He shook his head. "I'm done being neutral." I didn't say anything, just reached out and shook his hand. It wasn't firm, but it didn't shake anymore either. "I can testify if it comes to that," he added, "and I'll put my name on everything in that folder." "You'll probably lose your job," he shrugged. "Maybe, but I'd rather lose my job than lose my spine." I left the gatehouse 20 minutes later, with the flash drive in my pocket and a witness willing to burn every bridge he'd stood on for years. I had the shelter specs, the state bill, the fraudulent clause, the footage. Now I had testimony. Nancy's house of cards was swaying. All it needed now was a push. The conference room smelled like dry erase markers and old ambition. I hadn't been back to the office in over a week. My manager had given me a soft go-ahead to work from home once Emma's blood pressure started spiking, but I needed this space today. Its sterile walls, the clean lines, the absence of emotion. I needed to think like a consultant, not a husband. I dropped my laptop bag onto the table and started pulling everything out. FEMA compliance specs, shelter registration documents, HOA charter excerpts, Jared's flash drive, a printed screenshot of Bill 2449C. I lined each piece like a puzzle, not in chaos, but in proof. One folder at a time, I built what I called the kill shot, an airtight brief that didn't plead innocence, but proved weaponization. Nancy hadn't just overstepped. She had invented rules, bypassed legal safeguards, and violated health privacy in service of an ego trip disguised as policy. And now, I was going to collapse it in a single strike. I opened a new report template from my engineering license portal. Client case, zoning dispute, enforcement challenge. It wasn't meant for homeowners. It was meant for municipalities being sued by developers. But my credentials gave me access to submit it to the County Housing Oversight Review Board, a real board, a real review with real consequences. I titled the document, Unlawful HOA Enforcement and Regulatory Misrepresentation, Willow Heights. I wrote like I did for city councils, clean, factual, legally weighted. I included excerpts of Nancy's fake subsection, tied them to official versions of the HOA charter, then included Jared's recovered memo with digital fingerprint logs showing the file was created prior to any board review. The timeline alone could sink her. Then came the shelter specs, stamped by the county, approved by the registrar, coded under emergency compliance law. I cross-referenced each item with the FEMA resilience portal and highlighted the clause that invalidated all visual aesthetic objections for registered structures. I wasn't just compliant, I was untouchable. I attached the hospital footage, a link, not a file, secured, time-stamped, logged. The login history showed Nancy used her HOA contractor credentials to enter the hospital wing during off hours. And the angle? Perfect. She never once asked for consent. She never once identified herself. She just pulled the curtain open and recorded. I didn't need a judge to feel outrage. I needed a paper trail to show it was real. By noon, I had 41 pages, 2 letters of witness support, 1 signed affidavit from Jared, 6 code citations, 3 incidents of prior abuse toward neighbors, and 1 request for formal charter review from the State Housing Authority. I didn't call it revenge. I called it corrective escalation. I hit save, then exported, then uploaded it all to the county enforcement portal. Status, under review, priority, high. Then I sent a copy to the HOA general inbox. Subject line, official regulatory challenge filing, Nancy Feldman conduct. No threats, no emotion, just wait. I leaned back in the chair and looked at the glass wall facing the city. From here, Willow Heights looked like a peaceful set of matchbox houses tucked under blue sky. Nobody driving in would think twice about the rules. Inside, but the paper I'd just filed, it would rewrite those rules. I packed everything up and left 2 copies of the report on my desk. 1 for legal counsel, 1 for media if it ever came to that. By the time I stepped into the elevator, my phone buzzed. Jared. She's furious. Just left the office. She knows something's coming. Let her feel it. Let her know that for once her clipboard wouldn't save her, and let her understand what happens when you push a man trained to evaluate collapses. You get buried by the ones he engineers. The smell of charcoal drifted through the fence slats, mingling with fresh-cut grass and sunscreen. Kids laughed somewhere behind the pool. Classic rock hummed from a portable speaker near the grill. You wouldn't know a war was brewing from the way it looked out here, but that's what made it perfect. I walked into Glenn and Sarah Norwood's backyard just past 6:30. A few neighbors were already there, milling around the patio furniture, holding solo cups, pretending like this was just another Willow Heights block get-together. It wasn't. Sarah greeted me with a look, equal parts welcoming and wary. She'd been fined last year for leaving a single foldable swing out on her porch after sundown. Glenn had built a compost bin behind their garage that Nancy called a smell hazard without even inspecting it. They knew. We all knew. I nodded toward the side table where I'd set a slim black folder earlier that day. Inside were 7 copies of the same summary brief I'd filed with the county, abridged versions with the names redacted, but the patterns exposed. Glenn picked it up first, flipped through it slowly, didn't say a word. After a minute, he passed it to the woman next to him, Delia from Elm Row. She'd been threatened with foreclosure over a second-hand hot tub Nancy insisted wasn't within acoustic tolerance. One by one, they read. They asked questions in quiet voices. She really tried to enter your wife's room? Is it true she fabricated that clause? What's the board going to do when this goes public? That last question mattered most. I explained the next step, how the county review board had flagged the complaint for emergency hearing due to health-related overreach, how they had requested HOA representation for a scheduled hearing the following Tuesday, how Nancy would have to justify every enforcement action she'd taken, on camera, and how I wasn't the only one mentioned in the complaint. They weren't just listening now, they were participating. Delia spoke first. What do you need from us? I need 3 of you to sign a witness declaration, I said, about your own violations. Nothing fancy, just your side of the story, what was said, how it affected your family. I looked at Glenn. You're a contractor, right? Licensed? He nodded. 15 years. I need you to evaluate the shelter visually and confirm it aligns with the plan I submitted. Just visual. Don't need you touching anything. But your name, with your trade license, adds a second verification line. He nodded again. I'll do it tonight. Sarah crossed her arms. I can get you screenshots. Nancy told me in a forum comment that our tree represented a behavioral divergence. I took a photo. That was the thing about community abuse. It never just picked one person. It spread like mold, quiet, persistent, hard to prove until the light hit it just right. We were turning the light on now. By the time the sun dipped below the roof lines, I had 5 declarations promised, 1 contractor report pending, and 3 people volunteering to attend the hearing in person. The folder passed hands again. Nobody left early. As I stepped out through the side gate, Glenn caught up to me. Hey, he said, his voice low. Just so you know, she's trying to preempt this. I heard from Danica on the board. Nancy's prepping an emergency vote to give herself special enforcement powers until the hearing. Can she do that? She's trying to call it an executive provision, but she needs a quorum. That's where we stop it, I nodded. Tell Danica not to vote. I'll handle the rest. The trap was set. Nancy was about to walk into a hearing with a falsified violation clause, a digital trail of fabricated memos, hospital footage showing her entering a private medical space, and 7 witnesses ready to testify to her abuse of power, all wrapped in a compliance package backed by a certified FEMA consultant with full legal standing. She thought this was about a hatch, but what she was really up against was a structure built to withstand pressure, and it was about to crush her. The county housing enforcement office sat in a squat concrete building behind the DMV, ugly, gray, and exactly where you'd expect bureaucracy to live. But it was where things started to shift. I arrived early for the preliminary intake, not the hearing itself. That was tomorrow. This was the quiet step before the noise, delivering hard evidence to the oversight officer, finalizing exhibits, and letting the system load its chamber. I carried 2 binders, one for the board, one for myself. Inside, timestamps, engineering specs, Jared's statement, Glenn's contractor verification, and declarations from 5 separate neighbors, each one documenting a pattern of abuse, escalation, or false citation. 2 of them included printouts from the HOA forum, comments Nancy had made publicly, casually, but damningly. I signed in at the front desk. The woman there didn't even look up. Name? Daniel Reeve, Shelter Enforcement Challenge. Her hand froze halfway to the clipboard. "Oh, that's you," I raised an eyebrow. "That a good thing?" She finally looked at me. "Depends who you ask. Your file was marked high priority. You'll be seeing Officer Llewellyn directly." 5 minutes later, I was sitting across from a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a voice like sandpaper. Officer Llewellyn had a reputation for hating two things: bad coffee and fake authority. I liked her already. She flipped through the binder quickly, barely pausing between documents. Falsified clause, unauthorized hospital visit, shelter permit on file, digital witness memos. HOA charter last revised in 2017. This Nancy Feldman claimed subsection 12.4b, but this version stops at 11.3. She tapped the paper with the back of her pen. "Sloppy, arrogant, dangerous," I added. Her eyes flicked up. "Explain?" I leaned forward. She tried to submit a medical manipulation claim, not to protect anyone, not out of concern, to discredit my wife and justify an illegal removal. She's weaponizing legal language to dismantle protective structures. If she succeeds, it opens the door for other HOAs to do the same, especially in high-risk areas like this. Llewellyn nodded slowly. "You'll testify under oath?" "Absolutely." "And your background?" I slid a copy of my certification forward. "Registered structural engineer, licensed disaster compliance consultant. I wrote the emergency audit for Los Palmos after the 2021 fire. I'm not just defending a personal structure, I'm defending precedent." She nodded again. No expression, no comment, just approval. "Tomorrow's hearing is open to the public. HOA rep will be present. You'll have 7 minutes to present. We'll call Jared Olson first. Then we'll review footage. Then your neighbors." I stood to leave, but she stopped me. "Mr. Reeve?" "Yeah." "Make sure your presentation is sharp." She's going to come in smiling. These people always do. I left the office more resolved than I'd ever been. As I drove back through the main entrance of Willow Heights, I saw the usual: trimmed lawns, glowing porch lights, a delivery van tucked neatly along the curb. And then I saw Nancy. She was walking out of the HOA office, phone to her ear, smile tight as fishing line. When she saw me, the smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked just a little too fast. She knew. I didn't stop. I didn't wave. Let her wonder how much I'd gathered. Let her guess how many people were with me now. That evening, I sent a final message to the HOA general inbox. "To all board members, I'll be presenting formal evidence at tomorrow's county enforcement hearing. I invite any of you who wish to attend and see firsthand what's been hidden behind years of unvoted clauses and silent bullying. Let's bring this into the light. Daniel Reeve." One by one, I got replies. 2 were short, received. 1 said, "I'll be there. I've had enough." By midnight, my case was printed, numbered, highlighted, and bound. The trap wasn't just set anymore. It was loaded, and tomorrow we'd pull the trigger. The hearing room looked like a school auditorium that had grown up and put on a tie. Beige walls, folding chairs, a podium that sat a little too low, and about 50 people packed into a space built for 30. Word had gotten out. Neighbors I'd never spoken to were here. People with clipboards, notepads, phones recording from laps. A local reporter from Channel 5 sat near the back. Even Glenn wore a button-up instead of his usual work hoodie. He nodded at me once. No smile, just solidarity. Nancy sat across from me at a long rectangular table, flanked by 2 members of the HOA board. Her blouse was immaculate, her expression disarming, neutral, almost motherly, but her foot tapped under the table, fast. A clerk called the room to order. Then Officer Llewellyn took her seat at the center of the panel, flanked by 2 deputies from the County Review Board. "This is the hearing for case number 2025 HC 139, she began, "filed by Mr. Daniel Reeve regarding improper enforcement action by the Willow Heights Homeowners Association." She gestured to me. "Mr. Reeve, you may begin." I stood and walked to the podium. My heart was steady. Not calm, but controlled. I'd rehearsed every beat of this moment. I looked out at the room, and for once I didn't feel like I was defending myself. I felt like I was holding the blueprint to burn a rotten structure to the ground. "My name is Daniel Reeve," I began. "I'm a licensed structural engineer and FEMA-certified disaster compliance consultant. I built a legally registered emergency shelter on my property, one approved by the county and protected by state housing law. I held up the binder, thick with documentation. The HOA, under the direction of Nancy Feldman, issued escalating violations against this structure, not based on law, but on aesthetics. When those claims failed, she pivoted and went after my wife. A ripple moved through the crowd. I tapped the laptop on the podium. Officer Llewellyn nodded. The screen behind me came to life. Footage played, hospital hallway, security timestamp in the corner. Nancy stepped into frame, using her HOA contractor badge to bypass the visitor desk. She moved quickly, looking over her shoulder, then into a room. And then, she pulled back the curtain. Emma was curled on the bed, IV in her arm, monitors chirping. Nancy held up her phone and recorded. Someone in the room gasped. I turned back to the panel. This footage was obtained by a cooperating hospital security officer after my wife noticed inconsistencies in her visitor log. Mrs. Feldman had no medical authority, no court order, and no permission to enter. I turned the page. She then submitted a letter to the HOA board recommending enforcement action based on emotional manipulation, a claim tied directly to that unauthorized visit. Llewellyn leaned forward. Did she consult the board before submitting? No, I said, and I have the metadata to prove it. I gestured toward Jared, who stood and walked to the front. He read from a prepared statement, voice steady, hands still. I was instructed to delete digital memos from the internal drive, he said. I made a copy instead. The date stamps confirmed the violation letters were drafted before any board votes took place. Gasps again. Murmurs now, audible. Nancy stood. This is a smear campaign, she snapped. He's cherry-picking. These letters were, Ms. Feldman, Officer Llewellyn cut in, voice sharp. You'll have your turn. Nancy sat down hard, lips pressed tight. I wrapped up with a single sentence. This isn't about a structure. It's about control. The board turned to Nancy. She said nothing. Then they turned to the audience. Delia stood. She fined me for wind chimes, said they caused auditory tension. Another neighbor. She took my daughter's playhouse down without a vote. And another, she called my emotional support dog a symbol of instability. One after another, people stood. This wasn't a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. Officer Llewellyn tapped her pen once, then twice. We've heard enough, she said. Our decision will be issued in writing within 48 hours. In the meantime, all enforcement actions are suspended, and Mrs. Feldman is instructed to refrain from any contact with Mr. Reeve or his family. Nancy didn't move. I walked out to a dozen people following me. Glenn clapped me on the shoulder. You just did what nobody else could, he said. I didn't respond, just looked back at the building. Tomorrow, the ruling would come. But tonight, we'd already won. They held the meeting in the same clubhouse Nancy used to control like a queen's court. Only this time, she wasn't sitting at the front. Her nameplate was gone, her clipboard absent, and her chair empty. The county ruling had come in 2 days earlier. 43 pages, firm, final, and scathing. Violation unsupported. Charter manipulation confirmed. Unlawful attempt to override emergency shelter compliance statutes. Privacy breach under investigation. In simple terms, she lost. Not just the argument, not just the vote, all of it. Nancy Feldman had been stripped of her HOA privileges, fined $15,000 in personal penalties, and referred for further review by the State Housing Ethics Committee. Her actions were labeled a dangerous abuse of private authority with disregard for civil protections. But it wasn't just legal language that broke the silence here. It was the neighbors. People who used to lower their heads when she walked by now stood taller. They smiled when they spoke. They asked questions, challenged policies, and made suggestions like it was their neighborhood again. And today, they gathered to draft the first new amendment to the charter in over a decade, one that would require transparent voting on all enforcement actions, public disclosure of HOA board meeting minutes, mandatory third-party review for fines over, $200 and full immunity for FEMA-registered safety structures. I didn't speak until the end. When I finally stood, it was just to say one thing. I built the shelter because I needed to protect my wife. But this, all of this, it turned into something bigger. We all deserve to feel safe, physically, legally, emotionally, and no HOA should ever have the power to take that away. The room clapped, not loud, not showy, but real. Afterward, Jared found me near the coffee station. "Yes, someone asked if I'd run for board," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "You?" He chuckled. "Guess breaking silence pays off." I shook his hand. This time, it was steady. On the drive home, Emma called. She and the babies were doing fine. A few more weeks and we'd be a family of 4. I told her about the vote, the amendment, the way people had started referring to the shelter now, not as an eyesore or a violation, but as a turning point. When I pulled into the driveway, the hatch sat in the backyard like it always had, unchanged, steel gray, smooth, functional, safe, but now it stood for more than fireproof walls and air filters. It stood for standing up, for pushing back, for outlasting the pressure. Later that evening, I posted the full story online. Footage, documents, timelines, every piece of it. Not to go viral, not to humiliate, but to warn. Because what happened in Willow Heights isn't rare. It's happening everywhere. And if you're watching this and you've been threatened, silenced, or fined into submission by an overreaching HOA board, you're not alone. You're not powerless. You're just one shelter away from changing everything. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now. Share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from, because the next victory might be yours.